Alright, so this is the second part of operations. Depending on your business, you may want to talk about the contracts that are involved with your business. This may or may not apply to your business, but you might want to try to think about this. This is a little table to describe some of the things that you might want to think about with contracts. And you probably should talk to me and ask me questions about this if you think it applies to you. Otherwise, you don't wouldn't necessarily need to include any of this in your business plan. The main point is that there's trade-offs between different types of contracts, and you want to try to understand that. Those trade-offs are also seen in other parts of operations. So, for example, if you're you may need to have a location or equipment, and so there's trade-offs between actually leasing that facility or equipment or buying it. You might be familiar with these trade-offs based on a car, right? If leasing versus buying a car. And so if you lease, that's a lot more flexible because you put less money into it. So if there's uncertainty about whether the demand is going to be there or if the demand's up and down, it's kind of nice to be able to lease and not lock yourself in. Okay, but that means that you pay something for that flexibility. You pay more per unit cost. So so you're going to pay more per unit when you're leasing if your volumes are high. But sometimes you just can't predict that. So oftentimes entrepreneurs will start by leasing because it's less of a risk than buying. Another trade-off is between outsourcing versus doing stuff in-house. And as you might be familiar from other classes, if you outsource some of your production or some of your operations, that can be really nice in that you can, maybe other companies know how to do it, and they can get it done more quickly, and that can free you up and help you start before you really know how to do every part of the operation that you're doing. However, that can create, depending on who your partner is, that can create problems with quality control. Since you don't have control over their operations, if you're including a piece of equipment in as part of your product and it doesn't work right, that can create problems. And if they don't ship it to you on time, that can put you back a ways. There's a well-known example of how Boeing was creating their new jet of the future and how they outsourced everything, and they were just kind of managing. But they all of their contractors who were involved with it, they got behind on schedule, and then everything got behind on schedule, and because there were so many contingencies between different contractors that had to be in place at certain times, it turned into kind of a disaster. So those are trade-offs, right? You can do things that you couldn't do without outsourcing, through outsourcing, but there's some issues with quality control and timing, depending on who you're outsourcing to. And then finally, having a location. So a lot of times people think that they need to have a physical location to start their business, but more and more that's not true. If you can think of a lot of people that have startups that no longer need to have a location. In some industries, it might be really important. So if you're trying to do something with financial services, maybe it's important to have a location, and that's a sign of legitimacy. But obviously, anytime you have a location, there's a bunch of costs that are involved, and that can be expensive. So you want to think about, is there a way to do your business without having a physical location? Can you do it from home? Can you locate in a in a business accelerator or somewhere where the costs are really low, you want to think about that. And maybe they give you a combination of some of the signs of legitimacy but lower cost. One thing that is true about the operations plan in a business plan is that it's very variable between business plans, meaning that operations look so different between different business plans. So some of this stuff will apply to you and some of it won't. So if you're going to have a facility, for example, then it's important that you describe the location, show it on a map. If you have local competition, if you're competing for customers that they need to drive somewhere, you need to describe the local competition and who the target market is, and obviously that's a lot better if you can do that on a map. So you can create maps through Google Maps. You can just Google that. If you're going to have production, if you're actually making something, then you need to try to show how you're organized, what you're outsourcing, and it's nice if you can do a diagram. So this is one of those things where maybe you think like, oh, I don't know how to do that, so I'll just try to do it in Paint or something. Well, put in the time. There's some software out there. Google SketchUp is one of them. Or you can use the website Fiverr to maybe pay someone to do that. It just looks a lot better if you have a plan, the diagram of your operation. It just is a lot more clear that way. Similar with supply and distribution, you might want to put that in there if that's important to your plan. Same with order fulfillment, research and development. If you have to have inventory, you need to put some idea of what your inventory and minimum inventory levels is. Financial control, if you're going to do anything with payment terms, you need to explain that, because that's an important part that will flow into your financials. There are some businesses, like right now it's pretty popular to have cannabis businesses. If you're going to mention anything like that, you definitely need to talk about legal requirements, regulatory compliance, how you're going to get permits and stuff. Typically, like just a business permits and things like that are not going to go into your business, but with some type of business that's very, very regulated, anything with alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, you definitely need to discuss that in the operations section. And then finally, if there's any technology that's part of it that you think is important, you could add that in the operations section if you haven't already mentioned it in the product description. I mentioned that you could go to look at some examples. You can look at the examples on Web Campus. I have some links to these examples. You can also Google some more examples from Frank Moyes, who's at Leeds School of Business in Colorado. I'll just open this up here. This is rock grips, and let's go down. So you can look at these examples. You can see that they do have graphics. I like this. There's a market section. There they talk about industry, which we've also already covered. They show some competitors, which is good. They have a competition matrix, which we call the product comparison table. So some of these things are a little bit different order, but a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about. We've talked about marketing and how to position your company versus other companies. They use two axes here based on ease of installation and kid friendliness. They talk about their marketing and pricing. Here's their operations, a little bit about their facility, their production process. It would have been good if they'd show that in a diagram, something about their suppliers and staffing. And then you can look at the rest of the plan. So that's the operations for that business. We can look at This one called Nut Check. See if we can open that up. They include a table of contents. You don't need to do that for my plans. And they have an executive summary, which you will not need to do as you're doing the first half of the business plan. You're just going to start with the company overview, or company and product description is what we call it. I like this diagram. Obviously, it makes this tool seem a lot more, come to life a lot more rather than just trying to describe it. Here's some features and benefits. This is a little bit texty. They use some diagrams here. They talk about the description of competition. I like this. These competitors, they show pictures. They used a survey here that was kind of interesting. Talk about their target market and their channels for marketing. You have to remember these plans are maybe 10 years old, so so some of the graphics are not that great. This is a little bit more about marketing and sales, their revenue model. Here's their operations. So I'd say, okay, so they have who they're outsourcing to. That's nice and clear. You wouldn't necessarily need to put this in the plan. You could put it in the appendix. There they talk about order fulfillment, facilities. They should show a picture of that. And here's a development plan. There they have the management and some of the financials. You can look at that in more detail. Okay, so those are some examples. You can click on these links. You just want to try to think of how you can incorporate that into your own plan. We'll stop there for now.